Hi class, this is Professor Harmony Kim, and this lecture video is the last lecture of Buddhism and History of Theravada. For the first millennium of the Common Era, Theravada Buddhism existed at all outside Ceylon. The Sinhalese are well aware of their part in keeping this great religious tradition alive. The 19th century was a watershed in the history of Buddhism in Ceylon. In 1796, the British succeeded the Dutch as rulers of the maritime provinces, the Low Country. The Low Country is a term which refers to the now comparatively populous and developed west and south of the island. In 1815, British acquired control of Kandy. Kandy is the name of a city in the Central Highlands which had been the capital of the Sinhalese kingdom since the 16th century. The whole island had been brought under foreign domination, and Buddhism had accordingly lost its symbolic place at the head of the nation's affair. During the 19th century, Buddhism began to change its character. By the end of the century, quite a new kind of Buddhism had taken definite shape and begun to spread from the middle classes in Colombo. In 1892, the Anglican Bishop of Colombo published a rather well-informed book about Buddhism, and he wrote like this: "There are two Buddhisms now in Ceylon. One is the residuum of the old Buddhism of the past centuries, as it lingers in out-of-the-way places, and as it has shaped the habits and ways of those who are not under European influence. And the other kind of Buddhism is a new revival, much more self-conscious and artificial, which aimed indeed only at reviving what Buddhism always professed to be, but which had been influenced in its estimate of that profession very largely by Europeans." This new kind of Buddhism has been brilliantly analyzed by modern scholars. Professor Bichard has called it Buddhist modernism. Professor Obesakers called it Protestant Buddhism. For this movement in Theravada Buddhism, both originated as a protest against Christianity and itself reflects Protestantism. Its salient characteristic is the importance it assigns to the laity. Two kinds of influence have contributed to the creation of Protestant Buddhism. The primary credit must go to Protestant missionaries. The other credit goes to a handful of other Westerners influenced by them. That is, anti-missionary missionaries called the Theosophists. But their seed would not have fallen on fertile ground. In other words, the peace and prosperity of the 19th century has not brought about socio-economic changes. When the Buddha first preached, the urban middle class seized the religious leadership. Buddhism for the second time began a Protestant Reformation. A new Sinhalese middle class of bureaucrats, businessmen, and professionals such as lawyers, doctors, school teachers, and intellectuals centered on Colombo and arose for reformation. The Sangha's disestablishment and its loss of influence to the laity are connected. The traditional identification of the Sangha with the Sinhalese establishment is encapsulated in the refusal by the Sangha's headquarters in the late 18th century to ordain anyone not of the top caste. In the maritime provinces, long under European rule, the dominant caste no longer dominated. The fisher caste, their second in rank and size, was rising in entrepreneurial activity. In 1799, a monk who had mainly been cinnamon picker and soldier set off with 5 novices and 3 laymen for Burma. Upon their arrival in Amarapura, which was the capital of Burma at the time, the Ceylonese party was received by the reigning monarchy Bodhaupaya himself, and the Burmese Shangaraja presided over their ordination in 1800. They returned to Ceylon in 1803. So 5 novices and 3 laymen, they returned to Ceylon in 1803. In 1807, 3 further and separate missions set off for Burma, and all in due course returned successfully with higher ordinations. The main missionary organizations were established in Ceylon between 1805 and 1818. The most important were those of the Wesleyans, Methodists, and of the Church of England. Despite their association with the ruling power, their lack of success is remarkable. The missionaries were worried by the problem of nominal Christians, but they could rarely resist the temptation to maximize their conversion figures. The Christian population in 1891 was only just over 300,000, and the large majority of them were Roman Catholic. The main Christian influence on Buddhists was by reaction. The missionaries propagated Christianity in 3 main ways. One is by education, second is by preaching and pamphleteering. Let's look at the education side. Every mission station had a primary school, and the Church of England ran a collegiate institution to train school teachers and ordinands. The government also controlled some parish schools and administered them through the school commissions, which is a body heavily weighted with Christian clergy. It totally controlled government schools and made financial grant to others which qualified. Although the traditional Sinhalese system of education, the temple schools run by local monks persisted all over the island. But those schools never qualified for grant even after the secularization of government control because the monks failed to meet official standards in such matters as regular attendance and approved curricula. All the officially approved schools were Christian, and all Christian schools taught in English and were thus the necessary approach to government service and worldly advancement. The first hour of the day was dedicated to religious instructions. In 1841, parents were given the right to object, but most of them really did not mind. Nevertheless, most pupils continue to be Buddhist at home and attend Buddhist festivals. Let's look at the perspective of printing and pamphletery. The great technical innovation of the missionaries, and one which was to have a profound influence, was their use of the printing press. The first Sinhalese press had been established by the Dutch government of Ceylon in 1736. It was used mainly to print Christian propaganda. The second Sinhalese press was imported for the same purpose by the Wesleyans in 1815. The Anglicans and the Baptists then each set up their own. What was printed was more polemical than merely expository. The manager of the Wesleyan Press wrote in 1831 like this: "At present, it is by means of the press our main attacks must be made upon this wretched system. We must direct our efforts to pull down this stronghold of Satan." For the first 50 years of this onslaught, the Buddhist response was ironic. About 1835, a Buddhist priest wrote a tract saying that Christ had been incarnated on earth after an existence in heaven, just like a Buddha. Christ was virtuous and benevolent and taught the truth insofar as he understood it. Unlike many Brahmins in India, Buddhist monks did not shun contact with Europeans, and two learned monks had even assisted with the first translation of the Bible into Sinhala. Some monks allowed missionaries to use their preaching halls, and these monks were puzzled when their reciprocal requests were refused. Theravada Buddhists had not yet printed their scriptures, and indeed, It was a long time before some monks could be persuaded of the utility of doing so. The first Buddhist press was in Colombo. It had originally been imported by the church missionaries, such as Anglican, in 1823. The second was set up independently in 1862 by a Buddhist monk in Gali. Gali is the largest town in South Ceylon, who wrote for these presses. Two monks spearheaded the Buddhist response. One monk is Hikaduve Sumangala. He was a monk of much learning and generally traditional opinions, although he had been baptized in infancy. The other monk was Mohotivate Gunananda. He was a leading Buddhist in Colombo. In 1862, Gunananda founded a society named the Religious Society for Giving Increase to the Teaching of the Omniscient One. But in English, it was called the Society for the Propagation of Buddhism, in a way of imitation of the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel. This society acquired the press which had belonged to the church missionaries, and their first publication was a reply to Christiani Prajnapti. And this Christiani Prajnapti began as a monthly periodical in June 1862. The salient characteristic of Protestant Buddhism is the enhanced importance of the laity. In 1904, Sumangala was among several prominent monks who addressed a memorial of the Sangha of Ceylon to King Edward VII. In it, they wrote, "By the laws of Buddha, the laity formed no part of a religion. The Sangha are the only living representatives of Buddhism on earth." As there was hardly any Sinhalese printing before the 19th century, and manuscripts were virtually confined to monasteries, even the literate can have had nothing to read. In other words, earlier lay Buddhists lived in an essentially oral culture. Schools and printing presses combined in the late 19th century to produce a lay reading public for the first time in Sinhalese history. For the middle classes, this literacy was primarily in English. This gave them access to modern knowledge and allowed them to communicate with the wider world. At the same time, it often alienated them from the traditional culture. The danger of such alienation was apparent to achieve Buddhist, and they began to harness the educational revolution to their own requirements. A landmark in the history of Buddhist doctrine was the foundation of Vidyodaya Theravada. Vidyodaya is a Buddhist ecclesiastical college in 1873. In 1864, two prominent Buddhist laymen from Colombo had written a letter to the press suggesting the establishment of a college of Buddhist studies. The idea was novel, and it took 9 years to raise enough money to start Vidyodaya. In this decade, the institutions started by monks ran into financial difficulties and collapsed. Sumangala became the principal of Vidyodaya. Sumangala was assisted by a lay management committee which included several leading entrepreneurs, including a Colombo furniture dealer. Two years later, in 1875, two monks founded Vidyalamkara, which is a similar Buddhist college. Both these colleges admitted both clergy and laity. These two institutions continued for nearly a century as the leading educational institutions for Buddhist monks. They were given full university status in 1959. They have both been cradles of Protestant Buddhism and crucial for feeding that movement back into the mainstream of Buddhism via the clergy whom they educate. The heart of Protestant Buddhism is encapsulated in the title of Anagarika. Dhammapala invented Anagarika. Anagarika means a status halfway between monk and layman. Don Andres Pereira was president of the Colombo from 1883 to 1890. His son, who was born in 1864, is known as Anagarika Dhammapala because he became a monk before his death in 1993. The name Dhammapala means protector of the Dhamma or defender of the faith. Dhammapala used the term Anagarika to designate a new status. Dhammapala invented a status halfway between monk and layman. Anagarika wear a white robe instead of the monk's yellow robe. And Anagarika did not shave his head, but Dhammapala formally undertook a life of chastity and ascetic abstention. Dhammapala took the 8 precepts, and he took them for life while still a young man. Dhammapala thus made a dramatic public commitment to devoting his life to Buddhism, but without renouncing worldly activity. By devoting his life to Buddhism, Dhammapala meant not merely seeking his own salvation, but promoting the sasana and indeed the general welfare of Buddhists. Dhammapala worked hard to inculcate into the middle classes of Colombo some of the values of this worldly asceticism. Like all Protestant reformers, Dhammapala preached such virtues as honesty, diligence, and thrift. These were the values that the Buddha preached to the lady. One of great importance in Protestant Buddhism is religious individualism. Religious individualism implies religious egalitarianism. It is believed that all human beings to share the capacity for spiritual progress. Dhammapala accepted the Western Protestant view of religion as one and the same for everyone. Dhammapala saw Buddhist soteriological doctrine and activity as equally applicable to everyone. Thus, laymen should meditate. Other characteristic of Protestant Buddhism is that it claims that Buddhism is scientific. Dr. G.P. Malalasekara wrote like this: "The Buddha was the first great scientist to appear among men. The Buddha discovered what scientists have all now discovered, that there is nothing called matter or mind existing separately in this world, but they are the result of forces which continually cause them to come into operation, and that they dissolved and came into operation again." This is not nonsense. To call the Buddha the first great scientist is a typical Protestant Buddhist attempt to beat the modern West at its own game. Professor Jayatilaka mentioned, "We can find the theories of Freud and Wittgenstein, even the discoveries of astrophysics, galaxy clusters, and expanding universe in Buddhism." Because if Buddhism is not a religion founded on faith, but a philosophy founded on reason, such scientific procedures are appropriate and even necessary. Question 1. In Protestant Buddhism, which of the following is not one of the main Christian influence on Buddhists in Ceylon? I introduce 3 factors to influence the Buddhists in Ceylon. So you can find the answer from the lecture. Quiz 2. Which of the following is not true of Anagarika? Also, I explain Anagarika in the lecture video, so you can find the answer. This is the last assignment before lecture final. As you've always done, submit 2 quiz answers to my email address. Please include your official name, last name, comma, followed by first name, and also write down 2 quiz answers. And the due of this assignment is March 13, Sunday. Please do not generate the attachment file or zip file, ZIP file for weekly based assignment. This is the end of last lecture video. Thanks.